Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Captain America Civil War. Captain America Civil War is almost the perfect genre superhero movie from an expanded cinematic universe. By that I mean you can't really understand this film unless you had seen all the previous movies leading up to it, and if you hadn't, I think you'd no doubt probably be pretty lost, making it the perfect Marvel movie. Marvel Comics was always known for their continuity that stretched on and on through issues and issues that you'd have to know years and years of continuity sometimes to understand plot lines. And Captain America Civil War is even a further example of that than even Age of Ultron. I'm not sure how anyone could come to this movie first. You almost have to have seen, Iron Man and Captain America, and then Captain America Winter Soldier and Avengers, and then Avengers Age of Ultron to even understand any of this, and probably some of the other movies too. Also Ant-Man, and have a basic understanding of the Spider-Man character. And it's very based on what the audience knows and loves of these characters, and that's pretty much what it was like reading a Marvel comic book, when two characters could have two lines between each other and you would know exactly what that personal relationship was. There's a really quick fight between Black Widow and Hawkeye, and you completely understand the stakes and the relationship with one another because we as the audience already know that from previous two Avengers movies. And it's really satisfying to see that in a franchise and seeing what Marvel's really doing with this kind of cinematic universe. I know every studio wants to have one now, but Marvel's really become the masters at doing that because they understand how to build on that and build stories with that. And that's really kind of the perfect cinematic adaptation of a Marvel comic or a comic book in general. They're so good at it, it's kind of ridiculous. And Civil War, it's almost like, as much as you thought Age of Ultron out-Marveled everything Marvel had done before, Captain America Civil War seems to out-Marvel Marvel itself in a strange way. It's like they kind of keep building on this, and it's quite incredible. It's amazing how personal it can feel. It's almost thrilling as an audience because everyone there understands this experience. I think that's the fun of Civil War. That's why these Marvel movies feel special. It's just that personal connection, almost like a TV show or something. I know these movies get compared to that a lot, but Civil War feels that way. It's also a lot about ideology. As much as it's about action sequences and cool superhero fights, it's really trying to say something about conflict and different ideologies and getting into the ethics of superheroes and vigilantism more so directly than I've really seen other superhero movies do. I know they've gotten into that in The Dark Knight and the Batman and Superman movie, but in this it really feels like a discussion, thinking and talking about the ethics and the morals of these characters, not just how awesome it was that this guy punched that other guy. That's still in there. I mean, this is very a fun, audience-friendly movie, and if you're looking for an awesome action movie from Marvel, it does that, but also does a lot more, and it kind of really shows how amazing and how awesome this studio can really be, while also playing off the preconceived notions that you already have coming in and that you've had throughout all their movies up to this point. After the Avengers go to Lagos to stop Crossbones from hijacking a chemical weapon from a center of infectious diseases, which goes according to plan to a certain degree until Scarlet Witch makes a mistake and accidentally kills about 20 or so people, putting the Avengers not in the greatest light, and the United Nations, led by the Secretary of State Thaddeus Ross, the UN and 117 nations, has made a document called the Sokovia Accords after what happened in Sokovia. This puts the Avengers in check and makes sure that they have some actual oversight so that something like this doesn't happen again, because as much as they have actually saved the day lots of times, they have also caused a lot of havoc and had made mistakes, and people have died because of those mistakes and because of those conflicts. But this comes into a lot of question after they believe that the Winter Soldier is at it again, and Captain America decides to go off on his own to find the Winter Soldier and get Bucky Barnes back, and of course Iron Man on the other ideological side, who is supporting the Sokovia Accord, but of course Captain America is not, and they come to blows over this as Captain America wants to bring back his friend and not have oversight, fearing that they could possibly not send them to the right place or send them to the wrong place and have them do things that they don't necessarily agree with, whereas Tony Stark feels that they need oversight, fearing that the worst will possibly possibly happen, and they have a very ideological fight, would end up actually fighting each other and trying to figure out what exactly is going on with the Winter Soldier and trying to find common ground as characters like the Black Panther, who has also been wronged by the Winter Soldier, gets involved, and Spider-Man as well. As the Marvel superheroes are taking either side, as the Avengers are not sure where to go from here other than fight each other or take the disagreeing side in and let the Sokovia Accord become law. In a lot of ways, I think what I really love about the Marvel movies is really how much faith they have in the audience, which is something Marvel Comics has always had. They've always had this faith that you're kind of like a diehard fan and you're super into it and you totally understand what they're doing at all times, which makes it super confusing to anyone who really wants to get into Marvel Comics. As a kid who read a lot of comics, that would be kind of my conversations with people where I'd totally over-explain things because I'd have to go, oh, well, you see, the thing with Scarlet Witch is she's married to the Vision and she's Magneto's daughter, but not in this movie, obviously, because of the whole rights thing, but whatever. And then Quicksilver is her brother, and Quicksilver is an X-Factor, and she's in the Avengers, and they were both not raised by Magneto, even though Magneto's their father. They're raised by this weird horse person, and it's this whole thing. And most of the time that person would be super bored because they didn't read all those comics, so they kind of do not really want me to tell them how that happened, because that's really boring and doesn't mean anything to them, despite how I feel about myself talking. But when you're watching these movies and you've lived through that and you felt these things and had these amazing moments and as audience friendly and personal as these movies are, and how most of this isn't just about explosions. I mean, it probably is for a lot of people, but a lot of the times when they're fighting something, particularly in the Captain America movie, which despite all this other stuff, this is very much a Captain America movie, each of them are about something personal with him. When he's trying to get back to Winter Soldier, when he's fighting with the Winter Soldier, in the second one, it's very much about something that's personal to him. It's very much showing his growth as a hero. This very much feels like a sequel to Winter Soldier, and that Winter Soldier is about a difference in ideology. And then in Civil War, it's another ideological thing. The Captain America movies almost feel very political, but it's a politics you understand. It's almost like as a kid, politics felt boring because you don't understand the context. And really, as you get older and you've heard all these stories and you start building a base of knowledge and understanding of those politics, they do start to make sense and you actually have a much better, fully nuanced opinion. But in Captain America Civil War, all these things have been building. You know, this whole idea that Captain America and Tony Stark have different ideologies is in the first time they meet, the first Avengers movie. That whole like put on the suit and we'll go a few rounds is even gone through in Age of Ultron. It's all the things that Tony Stark is afraid of from the first Avengers movie when he falls through the black hole and starts having those fears of like kind of protecting the whole planet, and even why he made Ultron is why he's going against this. So we understand each of these characters. I think the continuing storytelling thing, the expanding universe and the continuity that Marvel's built up is really interesting in terms of storytelling, because you'd think it'd be harder to do, but the way Marvel clearly does it says a lot about the Russo brothers, and it says a lot about the whole studio and what Kevin Feige's really built. It just does it so well. It's kind of shocking. Like, there's so many characters in this, but it feels very personal. It feels like an argument between Captain America and Iron Man. It feels like a Captain America movie with the Winter Soldier and Falcon, and it also feels like an Avengers movie. This almost feels like if you've ever read a collection of a crossover story of many different comics collected and you're speed reading through them cover to cover, because it goes from like being a Captain America movie to an Avengers movie. It's like a Captain America Avengers crossover event that went on for 6 months, because it does go back and forth. It doesn't feel like an Avengers film because I tie that in my mind so much with Joss Whedon's direction, whereas the Russo brothers' direction does feel different. It feels like they've kind of grown technical wise, but I noticed they do the action sequences a lot more like an Avengers movie and less like the Captain America Winter Soldier thing, which was more kind of like a regular kind of action film. It was more about like personal punching and fists, and this is more superhero fighting, clearly because you have more superheroes who can fly and zap and all that stuff. And in Winter Soldier, you just had Captain America and Falcon and Black Widow, and Falcon's not even really in it till the end. They changed it up a lot because now you have all these different superheroes. The second unit of this was directed by the guys who directed John Wick. And even how they move the camera in this, like they do the shaky cam thing they did in Winter Soldier. It's like clear shaky cam, so it's almost like, why do you even use shaky cam this much? I kind of prefer the way Joss Whedon shoots the kind of big superhero fights and things like that, is he really likes to show it almost like a big kind of like mural almost when he does his pans. You look at the beginning of Age of Ultron, if you look at that amazing sequence in the first Avengers, in this it's like shaking, but it's like kind of just going like this, and the camera's really sturdy. That might be because the John Wick guys know how to do a clear action sequence, but they still want to be all like 2000s-y and shit. I don't get it. It's like, why bring green grass into this? But the action sequences are so much fun. Like, they're really good with the quips and the one-liners, and you can tell this is kind of like obviously a style that Joss Whedon started. I think the Russo brothers aren't really as good at innovating. I don't think this is an innovative movie. That's not really a strike against it. I think it's really good at being in the superhero genre box. In fact, it's amazingly good at it. It's almost like a perfect genre film, but it's a perfect genre film for people who are in that genre. If you're outside of it, you'll be like, who are these people? Within that genre, it's absolutely perfect. I think it's a lot more entertaining and personal than Age of Ultron. The whole nature of this story is more about these personal people and what this argument means to them, what it really means when you go toe-to-toe with a person, whether it's at work or a relationship or something like that. There's stakes to that. There's a history behind that, and going into a specific ideological argument or an argument about a certain thing really actually has a past and a meaning to it. Obviously, Tony Stark is coming to this from the idea about his parents and how his dad cared more about Captain America, and really like all the things that his dad didn't pay attention to him to. Captain America is almost like a surrogate for everything that represents, and that's going throughout this whole movie. With Captain America, it's kind of like what he understands is right versus what is political, and you almost don't trust it. The interesting thing about this film is you both understand where they're coming from, and as much as this film takes like Cap's side, frankly, because Captain America, he's like the headline guy or whatever, but like you still are not exactly sure if he's doing the right thing. It casts a lot of doubt on it, more so with Tony Stark, a little less with Captain America, but it's still there. It's kind of like the whole idea that even Dawn of the Planet of the Apes did so well about conflict, is that neither side is necessarily right or wrong. There's certain points that Captain America has that makes a lot of sense. There's certain points that Iron Man has that make a lot of sense. I don't actually necessarily disagree with them. You don't have to be extreme and pick whichever team or something. And this film kind of addresses that in a very adult, mature way. I'm probably the only person like this, but I really love the discussion between the Vision and Ultron at the end of Age of Ultron in the woods. Like, I find that really interesting, and I liked how many times they would just have them talking and discussing this out with like some really fun action sequences that are really crowd pleasing. And Marvel's always been really good at balancing that out somehow, making a hiddenly smart, very entertaining movie. You can't not talk about Spider-Man. I'm not really gonna spoil anything, so don't worry about that. But I have to say, this is one of the most fun portrayals of Spider-Man I've ever seen, and that he actually feels like very poor. He actually feels like he's from current Queens, not like this Queens from 1963 that couldn't exist now. That's something the Marvel movies have been really good at, is contextualizing these movies for current times. They don't think like, oh, well, this is the way it was in the comics, so this is the way it should be now. They understand how to bring that character to 2016, much like how Iron Man, they brought him to 2008. They do the same thing with Spider-Man, and it's very smart. Tom Holland acts like a kid. It feels like that Steve Ditko drawing, that lanky, kind of awkward kid. He feels like a real teenager, and which is something that I don't think he's ever felt as real of a teenager as Tom Holland brought to this character. His chemistry with Robert Downey Jr. is really amazing, and Robert Downey Jr., I think he has more of a range in Civil War than I've seen from him really bring to these films. You kind of remember he was kind of that cool character actor that everyone wanted before he became like the biggest movie star on the planet. You got the insecurities, his own weaknesses, and kind of how he reacts to them and impulsively reacts to things. He really did a lot of interesting things with that character that I really haven't seen him do as much. He's always good and really crowd pleasing in any of the Marvel movies and any of the Avengers films, but I feel like he did a much better performance. It might be probably one of my more favorite ones, especially in more of an ensemble as Iron Man. This is probably his best performance in that character, although I still think his best performance as Tony Stark was in first Iron Man. Chris Evans as well kind of brings more of an unsure portrayal to Captain America. You almost get that he's not exactly sure if what he's doing is the right thing. It's just the thing that he feels is the right thing. And since we have so much faith in Captain America, and Chris Evans brings that kind of confidence to it, that always what he's doing is the right thing, you kind of almost believe it, but then you're like, well, maybe he's not right, and you kind of get that through. You also understand like how passionate he is about it. The person I haven't talked about is Chadwick Boseman, who does a really great performance as Black Panther. I really like him as an actor, and I feel like he's almost perfect for the Marvel universe, and he really brought a lot to this character. Apparently a lot of what happened with the script originally was just a Captain America movie, and then they said, oh, we're gonna bring Civil War into it, but they kept all the old stuff from the previous previous script, and then they weren't sure if they were going to get Spider-Man, so they upped Black Panther, but they decided to keep Black Panther to be such a big part of this movie. And I think Chadwick Boseman like really uses that as a real display for his character. You really kind of get to love Black Panther. It's interesting that you have so many different superheroes in this movie, but they almost all get times to shine. They all get little arcs. You all understand what the stakes are, not just because of previous films, but also because of what they're doing now, especially like with Ant-Man being in this, and Hawkeye or Vision and Scarlet Witch, and what their relationship is. It's all kind of brought to a head. The interesting thing about watching it this time, and I'm reviewing this after I've seen it once, a lot of what you're expecting from a Marvel movie is different, because you're expecting the big iconic, big battle being the end of the movie, but it's not. The big fight that you've seen advertised where they come, running at each other at the airport, that's not the end of the movie. There's more to it that's more personal and has almost more stakes to it, and it kind of shows what's always been important to these movies. And it's kind of hard to argue that when they have very identical conclusions, and when they have it more about Cap and Iron Man and getting to the core of this argument, what's important to the core of this story, rather than what's supposed to happen in a Marvel movie, because that's always what's happened. I mean, those big conclusions are really what's at the core of the story, and they might not feel as interesting as what builds to it, but they're really the natural conclusion. And I think this film really cares more about the natural conclusion for these characters rather than having the big fight. It still wants to have the big fight and has a lot of fun with it. It probably has more fun with it than I've seen since the first Avengers movie, and maybe even better than that. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have that for every story. Not every story needs a certain thing. You need to understand what's best for your story, and this film definitely understood that very well. And it let it kind of naturally breathe. It felt like a little more organic, and just as you start to understand how these films flow, it kind of just rejects that and does what's right for these characters. And I think that's the beauty of this film and what makes this so much fun. Even like what they do with Spider-Man, they don't even really get into the origin. They just kind of like, and they just kind of trust you. And being trusted as a viewer from a big studio film is really such a rewarding experience, but also has so much going on, but can like coherently tell that story is just, I think, kind of quite amazing. They understand what's right for their characters and right for their story, but they understand what's right for an audience and having a good time and having a really entertaining time and having a time that you're going to go tell people about. Like, after I left the theater in the subway, some guy stopped me and just wanted to say like, hey, did you see Captain America 3? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, wasn't that awesome? And I said, yeah. And he just walked away. And it's like, I don't get that from like Gods of Egypt or something. This is like a lot of fun. It's a fun experience. The idea of just seeing Iron Man on the big screen, that's cool, but it's not as amazing as it used to be. I think Marvel understood like, well, we have to kind of bring that excitement, but bring that excitement shows how good of a storyteller they are, because unless you make a good movie, people aren't going to care as much. And I think they love this genre so much, they've expanded it further than anyone's done thus far. They've expanded it so far, I don't know how anyone's really going to catch up at this point, because this is kind of crazy. We've had a really up and down year in terms of superhero movies. You had Deadpool, who satirized the whole thing and made fun of it at the same time as doing it, and then you had a really piece of crap like Batman and Superman. It would be really hard to restore our faith in this genre after going through kind of a turbulent year. You couldn't just do kind of a regular routine thing, and Marvel comes out with this while giving us all the fun and amazingness and the joy of seeing a superhero movie, but also testing it and doing new things with it. And it's really quite an amazing, epic type of Hollywood filmmaking that we don't really see anymore. Kind of epic Hollywood filmmaking that kind of pushes boundaries while also staying within it. And it's something not a lot of directors can do. I think the Russo brothers really get shown as more studio directors, not as like auteurs or directors who have any personality, but you have to have personality to get this to work as well. You have to have personality to get a character like Baron Zemo, who Daniel Bruhl plays, who most people aren't going to talk about, and talk about how they still have a villain problem. They don't have a villain problem. They got that shitty kind of no personality villain to work as an interesting kind of cog in the machine, rather than just having a forgettable villain. This is really smart and playing with the conventions that you're so used to and ready for, and understanding like, sure, we're never gonna break out from the genre and change people's minds, but why don't we play within it? And I think that's what made Marvel Comics so awesome. That's what's made Marvel films so awesome. And that's when kind of filmmaking and genre and blockbuster coincide, when they don't really give a shit about getting the new people in. They just want to make an amazing example of what they do. And I think that's exactly what Marvel did and the Russo brothers did with Captain America Civil War. So if you've seen Captain America Civil War and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.